Most cameras today are equipped with a time-lapse option. So if you open up your camera and scroll across the menu here, you'll see something that says time-lapse. And the idea of time-lapse is rather than taking the normal frame rate of 30 frames per second, you're taking fewer um, frames so that combined you get to see something that took place over a long period of time. Now, time lapses have been around for a long time, even before movie cameras. So this is a time lapse I took. Well, movie cameras are available, but this is a time lapse I took when I was in high school. And I'm looking up here at the North Star would be right here, and these are all stars. This is going for about an hour. So I kept this open for about an hour because each of these arcs goes about a 24th of a circle, and in 24 hours, obviously we rotate on our axis and we're back to the same place. And so what I did is I simply kept the lens open because it was so dark that it didn't overexpose the film. But the apparent motion of the stars gave you this star swirl effect. So this is a classic photographic time lapse. In other words, just keep your lens open, and if there's motion, you're going to notice that motion. So here's actually the motion of the Earth spinning on its axis, which makes the stars appear to move. So when you look at a like old film, and most everything is digitized today, but with regular 8 millimeter, 16 millimeter, 32 millimeter film, and so forth, that you had these frames, and if these are played back at 30 frames per second, that the after image is such that the human eye can't really distinguish the individual frames. It looks like smooth motion. So digital cameras use the same idea. And so we have 30 frames per second. Anytime you're doing a movie, you're actually recording many, many frames of the same thing. And if you go to 240 frames per second, that's when you can get slow motion because you have a lot more data. And if you play it back at 30 frames per second, it'll appear 1/8 the speed. Now, the on the retina of the eye, there's photoreceptors in the back. Okay, so this is the retina back here, and this is an enlargement. If I took the section right out here of the fovea, right in this section, the macula, little dip, that's your position of highest visual acuity. This is the retina, and so we're looking at a cross section of the various cells involved in the retina. And the rods and the cones, these two cells here, are the cells that receive the light and transmit into electrical signals. So rods detect very, very low levels of light and give you basically a signal of light or dark if they're firing or not firing. Cone cells, however, they respond to higher intensities of light, and but they also give you your color sensation. So with rods, you can only see black and white, and that's why under very low light, everything appears either black or white, whereas in bright light, you can see colors. So let's say we look at this image right here. So if you just stare at that image, just continue to stare at that image and watch my cursor there, just continue to stare at that. So if I stare at that and all of a sudden I go to a blank screen, you should see the after image, but in opposite colors. You should see the red, white, and blue that were the complementary colors of the cyan, black, and yellow that you saw in the previous one. Well, that's because your retina gets tired after a while, and every time that you're receiving signals from your retina, there is a latency or a period that it takes to refresh those. And that's what movies work on, is movies work on the fact that you can't distinguish generally more than 30 frames per second. So, um, so let's say we look at some differences between these things right here. You can see that if this is the frame rate, the 30 frames per second, which is the normal one, seemed relatively smooth. 15 seemed very jumpy. Well, if I go this way here and take more frames per second, then when I play it back, I'll have slow motion. If, however, I take half as many frames and play it back at 30 frames per second, it's going to appear to go twice as fast. And that's the concept of a time lapse. In other words, take fewer pictures, show them back at the same rate. Okay, so This is a type of time lapse. We could also call this stop motion if we were doing animation. But this is a petri dish, and the petri dish is opened and then closed up again. And in the about the 15 minutes it was left open, bacterial spores and fungal spores landed on the agar in there and started to grow. So if you follow a colony, there's a colony right there. There's the colony again right there and there, and you can see that that colony just continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's all tracking the same colony. But at the same time, you're seeing other types of microorganisms and so forth growing. So if I put those all together, then I can have what appears to be like a motion here. So this is now um, the same thing where you've basically just tied those 12 pictures together to give us something that took place over about, well, it was about 12 days, was all reduced now into a period of a couple of seconds. That's the concept of a time lapse, to be able to shorten the time to watch an event. So rather than watching for 12 days, we can see something taking place there in a matter of seconds. So, I show how to in the slideshow. I show how to annotate these movies and so forth, but we'll skip that right now and progress to the next step here in terms of um, watching some other phenomena. So here I just set up two candles and just wanted to compare the combustion rates on both of these. And what would, if you watch the clock over here, you'll see that this took place over probably about 35 minutes or something like that. And so we can start asking questions about, like, you know, why do they, what rate do they burn at, and why does one burn at a slightly slower rate than the other, and so forth, and get into some of the chemistry. So we use time lapses for a lot of things like this. Like, this is embryology, so we're looking at a cell that's going through divisions. So the gametes have united, and then the cells are dividing, and this is a process that we can visualize. It takes place over multiple days, but again, because of the time lapse feature, we can get to see it in a very short period of time. Here's another example here, same type of an idea of something which is a very long process, shortening it. And I think I'll skip through that. That's in the slideshow, but it's too long to see right now. So this here is um, cytoplasmic streaming. These are chloroplasts going through here. This actually takes place in relatively quick time, so there's probably not a real reason to use time lapse for something that you can actually tolerate the time differential. But I wouldn't necessarily want to slow or speed up that kind of motion, because it is already uh, you know easy to watch. But let's say I'm looking at the development of a flower, and ultimately into a fruit or something like this. We can see this with a member of the Rosaceae family right here, and it's changing from basically a flower, and eventually we'll end up with the fruit coming from this. And so I'm just going to skip ahead in the video, and you can see there's the blackberries and so forth coming from that, right? Um, this is just putting some copper wires there in a silver nitrate solution, and you're seeing the formation of silver crystals. That might take, what you're seeing there, actually copper crystals, I'm sorry. That would take probably about 5 hours. But again, by taking it time lapse, I can play it back at much faster rate. Again, this is the growth of silver crystals that I put in the lab, and those are what you're seeing there is actually metallic silver growing, and that would have taken place probably over maybe a well, probably over half hour, but we were able to see it in seconds. We're doing the same thing here, just in not quite as magnified. So here I just positioned the camera pretty close to the copper wire. Here we're just looking back on the beaker. So So if you're thinking of time lapses, thinking about something that you want to visualize, like, where's the traffic going? So this is one Rich Eller and one of my students took of just the, overpass of the 405 freeway. You'll see the jets coming into LAX. Those little lines you're seeing up here, those are jets landing. So you can start just to get an idea for how many planes landed LAX or how much traffic there is. Again, slowing down or speeding up, I should say, a process which would take a long time. One of my friends, when we were on a church backpack, he did a time lapse here of the stars. So we're looking here, and again, this is opposed to the first one, which is all on film when you saw the star swirl. Here, these ones are actually putting it together in motion, and so what you're witnessing there is actually the rotation of the Earth's axis, the Earth on its axis, and seen in the stars. My son did this one here. This was up in the Alps climbing, and so we just took a little break, and he wanted to do a time lapse here. We're eating lunch to show how the clouds form. So if you look at this, if you watch something like there, you'll see the clouds are just coming out of nowhere right there, and that's a good way to talk about meteorology, like what is cloud, what are clouds, how are they formed, and so forth. And you can see a process here. Wet weather is really a nice thing to do with time lapse because it changes, particularly if you have clouds or just shadows and so forth throughout the day. So we're going back here now to a time lapse of the stars taken with a digital camera. So my son took this one with a digital camera, and the one that you saw at the beginning of the slideshow was taken with a film camera. So there's many different things that provide nice subjects for doing time lapse. Here's just a few. You might come up with your own ideas on this, but um, have fun with it. Make some cool time lapses and see if you can work them into your teaching in any regard.